All right, hey, this is JSB Morse, and we're here on our second Incensed podcast.
I'm Ross McKnight. I'm rather incensed because a wasp just stung me in the eye.
And we have with us Scott Kowalchuk, Canadian now residing in New Orleans, and brother Eric.
A drop of order in a sea of chaos.
Aw.
See, that's good. I think Sea of Chaos would be a good title for this one.
So Scott, with Nellie Bowles or Bowles, however she likes to say her name, I prefer to say Bowles. With Nellie Bowles, I agree with you. We have to account for everyone's different perspective, but we can't have any sort of valuable or meaningful conversation unless we agree on a certain degree of objectivity. So if we have all these people, of course, who read and know Jordan Peterson, who say, oh, well, you're misrepresenting the text because, we've actually read a lot more than you have, apparently. So I think she's misrepresenting the text and also misrepresenting the man. And I think, I could be wrong in detecting an agenda there, but she writes this one in particular, which was very interesting. So she's getting this statement from this Jordan Peterson fan, right? His name is Chris Shepard, and Chris Shepard runs a Jordan Peterson discussion group. He's talking about his college experience and how this is exactly the quote, he says, one law professor said something like, you young ladies should get married and start families, and he got fired. And then he says again, the message was just, you'll have a happier life if you get married instead of focusing on your career, certainly not a firing offense. And then Nellie's comment is immediately after that, except for now, it is. And then what I found also interesting in the whole article was the role that she gives women who appreciate Jordan Peterson. So there are, I think, only two women that she...
that appreciate Jordan Peterson?
Well, only two women, that she references in the whole article. And one of them is like this woman just screaming, we love you! And literally the way she writes it is, we love you, a woman screams from the back of the house. And then the other woman she talks about is kind of like maybe not the best representation of a human being in terms of intelligence. So she portrays women in her article as like who appreciate Jordan Peterson. These two women who appreciate Jordan. Oh well, they're not very smart. They're just extremely emotive and we love you type fangirls. Which is interesting because it seems like she has this progressive sort of feminist mentality, and yet she's kind of, if she's going to portray women in this way, then is it because this is truly representative of the type of people, who really go for Jordan Peterson's cultural criticism, or is it because she has an agenda?
Yeah, not at all. She's either a good journalist or a good feminist.
I agree with that. But,
It's tough, right? Because, I read the article and me personally, I don't take a lot away from the news or editorials or articles because essentially all they are is a story. And, at the end of it, you either enjoy the story or you don't. I mean, we say we're watching the news to catch up on, the current events, the things, the stories that are, of relevance now, but they're really not. I think, it is a fiction in some ways. Maybe some of the players within it are non-fictitious, are real. But at the end of it all, it's still a fictional story from somebody's perspective. So, I mean, from her perspective, do I agree with her representation of them? No. I mean, what I've read of, my readings from other philosophers from him, in school, it's all going to manifest itself differently. So her manifestation of him is, from the article, I think, is one of being more fearful, which I think if you were to... The one thing that I've always liked about the way Jordan speaks and carries himself is that he says that the rational person, I'm paraphrasing, so it'll be terrible, but the rational person's approach to everything he says and he brings up should be that of skepticism.
Right.
And her article is very skeptical of of him, as
I think it's more than skeptical. I mean, we have to, look at the subtitle.
it depends, I guess, on anything. It's like, well, let me ask you guys, like, you read the article, what do you want to take away from it? Like, not necessarily the article, but as, I assume, three men who are probably influenced by his words. Like, you read that article, and I assume your individual opinions of him differ wildly from her representation of him. What does that do to you?
I didn't read the article, and it sounds like a hit piece. So,
well, the title makes it sound like a hit piece. You look at the title, you're like, yeah, this is a hit piece.
Well, yeah, and I just don't know if there's anything valuable in there. Like, I do.
This is what's valuable. It's valuable in reference to other current events. That's why I thought it was valuable to discuss.
Yeah.
Pretty fascinating, because she goes through a lot of different, I guess maybe we could call them currents of Jordan Peterson thought, and she's mocking those things as she's talking about them. But you can tell that there's some interesting stuff going on there. And if you get rid of this veneer of mockery that is almost inherent in her tone and probably everything that she does, if you get rid of that, then it's pretty clear there's some really good stuff there. When he's talking about witches existing in swamps, she's like, yeah, but they don't exist.
Yeah.
They don't live in swamps.
It's like literature, baby.
Yeah, like, how could he possibly say anything so ridiculous? And yet, if you dig into that, what he really means is that the concept of a witch exists in as much as those tendencies exist in
humanity.
Certain members of the human race.
They reveal themselves, yeah.
They can be manifest, and when he gets into it and he talks about it in his lectures, it really makes you think. It connects you to the human experience, and I think there are a few people that might read this. Yeah, the archetypes, exactly. There are a few people that might read this and say, "Oh, maybe there's something to that," but they have to dig through a bunch of that mockery and sarcasm to even.
So, are you saying
see it.
Are you saying that there's something in there, but it's all from Jordan Peterson? There's nothing in what she's presenting that is any like a good argument or thought-provoking.
No, she doesn't add to it.
This is where I'm kind of curious about the context for you guys, because her perspective is different, right? Like, whatever that perspective would be, I'd say probably a lot of it is somewhat dismissive.
Yeah.
But it's an article, right? Like, I mean, the article is just going to be, it's going to be a touchstone. It's going to, it's going to exist independently of everything else.
Sure.
And, for me, it's sort of like I said, I try to stay away from the news predominantly, like, unless there's a storm blowing in, and even then.
Fitting.
But yeah. But I guess this is again me being Canadian down here and trying to understand the dialogue between people, because it seems like the trouble that I've had in interacting with a lot of people that I've met down here is there isn't that point of realizing that two people's opinions are different. It's that realization that somebody else's opinion is different from mine unless it's wrong.
Aha.
And I don't think that that's the case, because I think that both stories are telling us something.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of listening and kind of going, what is she telling me? From her.
Interesting. I mean, I think it goes back to what Joe was saying. You're giving her the benefit of the doubt and saying she's offering something, even though it's different. She's offering something,
but she's operating within the context.
She's not offering Jordan Peterson the benefit of the doubt. It's different, but it's...
Right, Scott. She's operating within that same context that maybe you've had problems within, right? She's saying, well, he's wrong. Here's why. I'm right.
Yeah.
And I think we all have problems, probably primarily with that, and that's what militant feminism says just across the board, which is, that's what any ideology says.
Yeah.
I'm right, therefore you're wrong. And that's what I'm seeing here. So I'm not seeing, the value I'm not seeing is the conversational nature, the exploratory nature, the commentation that invites other commentation, and what I'm seeing is just, here's my ideology, and here's what I perceive to be Jordan's, and because anybody who maybe remotely sounds like he might be opposed to my ideology is a threat to my ideology, he must be wrong, and here's why. Why won't these witches just behave?
Yeah, no, they're all tough concepts, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the trouble with any sort of ideological approach to any of this is the notion that there is an absolute right and an absolute wrong. Like, I can't perceive it all that way, because the pro-life, pro-choice, like, I would perceive both as right and both as wrong. Both provide certain ideas that I agree with that, and then other ideas are just like, well, no, that might be a bit into extreme thinking, extremism, and then the other is a balance, and that's where I have trouble with a lot of these arguments. Is I can't say that one's wrong, because it's not wrong. Like, it exists as a story and a narrative for a reason, and like I've had a lot of trouble talking with people politically in the United States because of that, because that divide between Democrat and Republican seems so ideologically opposed.
You're not going to run into that with us. None of us are like politically affiliated.
That's partisanship, right? You're talking about the partisanship.
Yeah.
What we try and look at as individual issues, okay, well, what is good for society versus what is bad for society, and a society is built for humanity. So the core, of course, the first principle is human life.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of it is dependent upon if our representation of it in the way that we live, which is very much a European model, which is an old model, doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. There's probably a lot within it that works and a lot within it that doesn't. But like, even Jordan's notion of, enforced monogamy, I understand what he's saying, but
rather than promiscuity.
Well, no, what is our closest biological relative? Is it, it's chimpanzees?
Chimpanzee, yeah.
Chimpanzees, the women, the female chimps have multiple partners. So the birth child, nobody's quite sure as to the lineage, who the father is. So within sort of their tribe, everybody's responsible for him or her. And, if that's our sort of closest biological yardstick to measure ourselves against, monogamy probably is a good choice. But by the same token, biologically, can we say, is it completely right for us? I don't know. I don't think so. It may be, it may not be. But there is that.
Yeah, natural tendencies though aren't a good yardstick.
Sorry.
Natural tendencies aren't a good yardstick.
I don't know that I agree with that.
Well, I mean, I have natural tendencies to want to kill my opponents, but it's not a good. Yeah,
but that's natural male aggression. Like, I mean,
sure, but it's not good for me to go out there and act on it. That's not good for society.
Well, no. So, I mean, of course we say, don't do that, but like, it's still within us to do.
Sure. So how do we channel it in a good way? And that's where objective morality comes from.
And then how can you say that it is objectively good that it's
Right, you
beneficial
have to.
for humanity.
Because our
as a whole.
language, the language we use is built around morality. If we didn't have this, if there weren't some sort of objective morality to which we all subscribed, our language wouldn't actually function mechanically. Because it's all based on this is good, this is bad, this is beneficial, this is not beneficial, and then the why and the wherefore.
Yeah, but I mean, look at the way that we communicate now, which is, I mean, I've been alive a few decades. I've been riding this train for a while, and it's like this is a moment, and it might not be me as a Canadian in the United States. It might just be that our ability to communicate is breaking down to a degree where
True, because people are losing sight of that.
Yeah, I think that's actually maybe even a more interesting conversation.
Yeah, it is.
So, and I want to see.
We
Scott,
agree with you, Scott.
Hey,
Yeah.
I don't care. You guys.
You don't care?
You guys agree or disagree. That's part of the conversation.
But I think the point is to be able to disagree well
And agree well.
Eric, you had an article about that, right? So I wrote a book about this, and something that you said, Scott, kind of rings a bell. So I want to pitch it and see what you guys think about it. So the idea is that the book is called Everyone Agrees, and the idea is that there is truth. And obviously everyone doesn't agree, right? People disagree all the time. But the idea is that there is one truth, and people have different perspectives of that one truth, so that they seem to disagree. But they may be, within their own frame of reference, they may be logical, and so that's why they think that way.
They just have a locked door, and they don't have the key. They lost the key.
They have one. That's possible. Yeah, they haven't seen the other doors that
like
we've
look at the
seen,
Ninth
for
Ward,
instance.
or look Steubenville, Ohio is a good example. My sister and brother-in-law work over there, and they work with inner city youth who just don't understand that they have an opportunity. So they try and do the best thing that they can do, which might be to like try and get money by selling drugs or whatever, right? Like, so money is the good, and money, well, it is good to be able to provide certain things for yourself and for your family. So their locked door is, I don't have to do this. I could graduate from high school, find a good job, and maybe even have more money, and be able to provide more for my family, and not live in the drug house, and not get involved with gang warfare. So yeah, I think it's just locked doors. I think Joe's right. Like, everybody agrees, and that's what I find when I talk to people is like, you're focused on a good. You're just focused on a good that's, its priority level is down here. There's a hierarchy of goods, and this one's at the top, and you're kind of stuck halfway up the mountain here, and you can't get around this door because you lost the key, or no one ever gave you the key.
Yeah, or just like you're not able to see it somehow.
You're not able to see it, and I think that's probably accurate.
But,
and that's how a lot of people hate the Catholic Church because they don't know what it is. Who said that? I can't remember.
It was Fulton Sheen.
Fulton Sheen.
Yeah, it's like 100 people hate the Catholic Church. More than 1 million.
Hate what they think the Catholic Church to be. So right. So, and they'll talk about, like the sex scandal and, like, I don't know, indulgences and the Spanish Inquisition. Patriarchy. We
get it all the
time. The laundry list. So they hate so, and that's where I think where we are too is, when we look at people like Miss Bowles, we realize that she hasn't climbed up maybe to the crust of the earth. She's still in the bowels. And there's a locked door in front of her, and no one's given her the key.
But
hopefully she finds it. Hopefully
she
reads
has
more
to be
Jordan
open
Peterson.
To do that, and it doesn't seem like from what I'm hearing
that's
that
a
she is
personal,
open. She's
emotional, spiritual choice to be open to the truth.
Right,
Yeah.
and to have a good conversation with someone that you disagree with, that requires a level of openness and the acknowledgement that you don't have the entire truth, and so that you may be.
And I don't either.
Yeah, and I think that you need to do that if you're going to converse with somebody that you disagree. Nellie evidently thinks that she knows.
Yeah, see, I appreciate
everything.
that, because that's that's something that, like, I've had the hardest time breaking through with people, just talking, and to find people who have that humility
Mm.
to say, I don't know everything. Finding that humility, and I think a lot of it has to do with, with age. Like there's a lot of arrogance that comes within, within your 20s, in my 20s, of, I have a framework that I'm working within. This framework is absolute.
Yeah.
There was a time where, I was reading communism and Marxism and going, there's a lot at play here that is valid.
Yeah.
And on
Yeah.
paper, I think a lot of it still is valid, but I mean, in practice,
Right.
Well, yeah, some of the arguments
Right.
have to be in order to be so popular.
And people still say that, they're like,
Yeah.
but look at it on paper. Look at it on paper. You're like, yeah, yes.
That's that instance where humility has to come in and go, you know what? I thought this thing. I think I was not necessarily wrong. I just didn't know enough.
Yeah, and
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So how do you get to that point where people aren't afraid to say, all right, I made that comment, that was wrong, but I'm better for changing my mind
Right.
toward the truth, because that's clearly true, instead of saying, all right, well, that idea is wrong. If I accept that, then I lose my own identity.
I get that, right? Because like it's a fear of judgment. Sorry, Eric, you go ahead.
Oh no, I was saying. I mean, it's that's, I think, a real problem, and it might be just more with modernity and the communication age. But a guy named Drought has a lecture that he brings this up, and he's talking about politicians, how they get criticized when they change their mind on something, and it's almost like, oh, you're a flip flopper.
Right.
Well, in fact, it's the fact that they're actually changing. They have courage enough to think about something and change their stance on something. That should be encouraged and supported.
Right, like Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, exactly.
Has that been?
I kind of have his haircut right now.
Anybody else?
What's that?
Has that kind of been? I've kind of been thrilled about the whole Korean thing.
Oh, I love it.
Like as soon as I read and go like, oh, they're talking, shut up. Like, and I don't really, I've never been to Korea. It's it's in the back of my mind, but just to see two oppositions going like, hey, what's up?
Yeah,
Cool.
the video of the handshake, I thought that was extremely powerful, and people would mock it, say like, oh, the only thing a dictator needs to do is do a handshake, and all of a sudden he doesn't want to kill everyone anymore, and everyone loves it. But I think it's really powerful, and it was unexpected. Maybe Trump expected it, I don't know, but I love it. I think it is a positive thing that from the news, you don't hear that much. You have so many people that want war, and then pride is on the line, so it just ramps up, and then all of a sudden it's diffused seemingly overnight. It's amazing.
Let's see what happens with it. Again, like a lot of it is narrative, right? Like, what is the narrative that both North Korea and South Korea are operating within right now? Because all we're ever doing is telling a story. Like what Eric was saying with a politician who changes their mind. What is the context for that change to happen? Is it something righteous? Is it something coming from a really beautiful place, or is it something that is contextual to, I don't know, something very low, lower tier, an election campaign promise, or I don't know. It's like I'm a storyteller, so anytime I hear stories, I always try to deconstruct them and go, okay, what is the actual story being told?
Yeah.
And like with Nellie Bowles, I'm gonna say Bowles article.
Hey, everybody has their own context.
Yeah, like her story.
Some are wrong.
wrong. See, and that's right. Like I'm okay with wrong and right, because like they both serve a function. So like her article, I don't know, I'm coming back to it for some reason. wrong or right, it's inconsequential to me, because however she's interpreting his work, I think is important, because it can be interpreted that way.
Yeah. So I got a question though for you.
I don't know. Can it?
Because it seems like that we agree that, you know, there are different perspectives. People have different perspectives, and there is value in all those perspectives, because, you know, the sum of all perspectives is, you could say, the truth, the entire truth. So you got to get all the perspectives, everyone's.
Some perspectives
ideas.
are more valuable than others.
Absolutely.
There's not equality between perspectives.
Some may incorporate more knowledge.
Right.
Or more
Because some
valuable
are more universal and therefore closer to the truth. Yeah.
And that's the question. So, is there an objective truth? And this is directed to Scott, and I would say yes. And so, does that mean, even though someone's quote unquote wrong, their opinion is still valuable? But doesn't it make sense to rate that person or rate that argument less than a true argument, or an argument that's closer to the truth?
I see. That's the tough one. I mean, the rate system. I wouldn't rate something. I would either.
If the object is determining what is true, we have to put that in there.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your object, but I mean, objectively for me, it's, does this opinion that I hear add to my absolute truth? Add to the container that I'm trying to fill up of, what I've experienced and what I'm trying to know and trying to sift and guide myself through the world. Is it of importance to me? I mean, that's selfish. That's a selfish way to interact with what you consume. But
right, you have to say if it's important overall.
Yeah, can you go back to Joey's original question? Is there an objective truth? Can we start there?
Oh,
and that, I don't know. We might be channeling Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, because they spent a good deal of time talking about this very question.
That's right, they did. And they couldn't. What was it that they couldn't agree on? Anyway,
yeah, it doesn't matter.
Like I think our perception of the absolute truth is fundamentally always going to be the same, but the way that we interpret it and relate it to somebody else is always going to be different.
Sure.
So I don't necessarily.
As a foundational, like a premise.
Yeah.
Can you say that there is an objective truth? Whether we see it or not is a different story.
Yeah, I don't know, because as soon as I say yes, there's definitely an objective truth, that means that there's what I've said is that no matter what, I'm trying to reach that finish line, and that finish line is the absolute truth, right?
Right.
And let's say you reach that finish line, you get the absolute truth. All you're going to do is see another finish line beyond that.
Then it wouldn't have been the absolute truth.
Yeah.
But that could be
right. So we're talking about like there is an ultimate home for the human intelligence that satisfies all of its longings, desires, deficiencies in knowledge, right? Like that's what we're talking about.
I wouldn't see that as like the objective end point, like, because again that assumes that I know this is old and cliche, but it assumes that the end is the goal. I don't know if the end is the goal.
Right, but the end is also, if it's true, it must also be infinite, because the human psyche, right, is always seeking upward, and it is always evolving and improving upon itself, and without that seeking and without that journey, there is no fulfillment. So in a sense, the fulfillment is in the journey. So if there's something that's absolute and absolutely true, then it must be also infinite.
Yeah, I mean that's a good argument.
I know. I'm gonna go have lunch. I'm just joking.
No, that's good. That's a good mic drop.
I'm kidding.
Well, no, and I think that's the case with the absolute truth. There is no finish line necessarily. I don't think we have the capability of being omniscient. So
No, and a lot of this too is probably my own inability to commit, to certain concepts, because I like being personally, I like being flexible.
Well, we don't need to know about what you do in the bedroom.
Not much apparently.
No, but I mean, flexibility is great, but I mean, you can't. If you lived your whole life with an open mind, I mean, that would be extremely boring to me. I have to have some principle by which I'm going to measure other things so that I can determine whether the principle is correct or incorrect at the end of it. So I'm going to, and so that's why it's actually really easy, right? I just say, well, the truth has to be infinite, it has to be immutable, it has to be omniscient, it has to be, omnipotent, it has to be everything that is beyond me and all of humanity and everything that I've ever experienced. And so that's something that's easy to hold on to, right? I can say, oh, great, the truth is this, and if it doesn't measure up to that, well, then it can't, it doesn't matter. So really, assuming that there is a truth is... It's also, I think it satisfies what you're thinking. You like to be flexible, but the truth is it's infinitely absolute and flexible at the same time because it's infinite.
Right.
Interesting.
And at the same time, because it's infinite, it sheds away things that are finite. So if we are looking at that, I think that go down through multiple tiers of hierarchy to Nellie Bowles. Right, what is she saying, and does it have any value in accord with what is infinitely good for the human person? I don't think so. And the reason why I'm saying that as a final evaluation is, you said that she was fearful, and I think that she's not fearful. I think she's very confident, in writing this guy off. She's like, oh...
Overconfident.
Eschew that, because that's just, the patriarchy. As I've said in my title, look at me, right? I know what I'm talking about. I think what it makes people like us frustrated. I think it makes a lot of people frustrated who have found Jordan Peterson and are like, okay, here's a modern voice for classicism, right? And for objectivity of perspective, and for looking for what is true. Because Jordan Peterson always asks the question, okay, in response to white privilege, okay, what percentage of my success is related to white privilege, and what should I do about it? That's the question he asks, right? And if he's approaching just his own thought and political thought and cultural thought in that way, then there's nothing healthier, really. And also what I see is, in Ireland, I see, abortion rights, now you can do whatever you want. That hasn't been good for society in general. And I also see vast discontent, right? And it almost she seems like more of a radicalizing force than Jordan, because now, she's saying, oh, Jordan, what he says about masculinity, what he says about femininity, what he says about marriage being good, monogamy being good, raising children to be good members and productive members and whole, loved and loving members of society, is not a good thing, because that's the patriarchy. What is her alternative? And it seems to be this dystopian world where everyone's isolated, they have fleeting relationships, they're promiscuous, and they abort their children because there's nothing to do for them at that point after that relationship's been had.
So what you're saying, Nellie, is that you want the dystopia.
I don't know. That's what I see. I see she wants dystopia. She almost, a modest that's her proposal. And it almost, by saying, why won't these wives and witches just behave? I almost see that maybe if there are some guys out there who want these wives and witches, why won't they just behave? And that's the perspective. I think that she's kind of encouraging them based on the worldview that she's maybe trying to promote, in lieu of, maybe trying to figure out what you should do to change the world first, and how you can make yourself better and other people better, which is, of course, the one that Jordan espouses.
Yeah, I think that would happen. Truth finds a way of making itself known.
Yeah.
To people who are seeking.
For me, a lot of it, that truth is always going to be subjective to, Ross, what did you call it? It was the finite experience. So like the finite experience is what I would perceive as, you know, something human and fleeting. You know, something that, you know, you have one night and you enjoy it, and then you choose a new path the following day. But I mean that
ends.
It ends, but it's also a substantive part of the accumulation of you. Because I mean, if all a human being is the accumulation of a story, then the truth for each of us has to be, you know, uniquely defined to that story.
That's a fact, though. I mean, that's like experiential fact. This is what I did today, and I experienced it, and that was the fact based on my own subjective understanding of what took place.
Mm-hmm.
And which, yeah, a lot of us struggle with objectivity, but we're saying that there's something beyond that, right? There's something beyond that subjective experience, which makes all of these actions consequential, ultimately. Because if we're not seeking what's beyond ourselves, then society's going to collapse anyway.
So Scott, it sounds like you're more agnostic than
yeah, I mean,
or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about
like just focusing on the concept of truth and objectivity. I mean, do you know for certain that there is no objective truth, or is it more along the lines that you just have no way to determine that for sure?
I'm still seeking it out. I mean, you know, a lot of it is, I mean, I envy people of faith sometimes who, you know, have some sort of belief structure that is, helping them stand up every day. It's kind of how I perceive it, is that hand that kind of holds you as you walk through the chaos of all of this. I don't have that, and I've never had that, and it's not something I've ever really sought out. Because I'm trying I think a lot of who I am as an artist is living within chaos and trying to make order of it. Because that's how my brain, that's how my hands work, is that, you know, I start with a blank piece of paper and I just add chaos to it, and it's supposed to represent something that's orderly by the time it's all done. And if sorry, go ahead.
Why do you say you add chaos to it? Why do you put it that way?
Because a sheet of paper as it is perfect. Like it needs nothing more than what it is. You know, it's, you know, white, black, green, whatever. You know, it's absolute. So absolute, you know, I perceive absolute as order, and I mean, chaos can be equally absolute, but it's that harmony between the two that creates, I guess, magic. So my trying to bring chaos to order that ultimately looks like something is maybe not chaotic, maybe it's harmony. So
yeah, well, it seems like you're applying anything you like, whether you're drawing or you're painting, that's applying order to chaos. I think
See, and I perceive it the opposite.
Someone makes paper, right? Someone makes paper. And I think that's really, there's always that, like, never-ending channel backwards where, okay, what precedes? You've got to have X and Y, you know, to find the solution. So, Scott, what's interesting, and specifically in reference to the fact that, yeah, you are an artist, is that there's that impulse within you, right? Which there's an impulse. I think everybody has that impulse. Yeah, you know, I was out in my garden earlier this morning, right? So we all have that impulse, and it's innate to humanity to bring order into chaos, right? You're creating something new, and there's a certain amount of chaos involved with that, right? Because it's a reordering, right? It's like, okay, this wasn't good enough, therefore now it's better, or it's something else, right? And that adds to the beauty and the plethora of all of the created things. So right, where does that come from? And I think because you are, you know, if the way we look at it, if we are story makers, right? and we come from somewhere, then we're maybe part of a story that we don't fully understand.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, we're independent actors because we're going out there and we're participating in that story and we're like changing it. We're throwing in another chapter. We're ripping one out, right? Whether that's good or bad is the whole conversation we're having now.
I have a question though. So, I think this makes it easier, or maybe it will, to accept absolute truth. And would you say that it is true that there is no absolute truth?
Boy, that's a good one. Shit.
Or are you certain that there is...
Come on! I knew Joe was gonna say that too, because...
Or is it objectively true that there is no objectively true?
Oh,
Or do you know that you cannot know?
Yeah.
Or
So
is it probable that there is...
This is why Jordan Peterson's so important. This is why I said he's a modern Socrates, right? Because he's going...
no absolutes?
So this is why, yeah. Y'all are so... I hate you all.
It's problematic, isn't it? Like,
it's all problematic, right? It's you know,
well,
you agree on one absolute, and it's sort of, okay, I can agree to that, and then you say, well, no, there's this other absolute. It's like, well, I can agree to that too, but in the end, this one might be beyond me, fellas.
well, I think that
I think that's the point.
important thing, and that's there's no shame in that. And I think all these conversations are beyond us.
Yeah.
But I think the idea,
beyond is the truth.
well, no doubt.
The beyond is the learning.
well, and difficult...
Which is infinite.
Shouldn't be the barrier. I mean...
Right.
I think there's an impulse in the human soul to try to nail this stuff down and figure this out. And that's basically, that's the impulse to get toward that absolute and to figure it out.
Yeah, that's what makes the conversation worthwhile. That's what
Conversations are.
That's what we're doing this podcast, right?
Absolutely.
Just
getting back to Joe's book, so difficulty. Just because it's difficulty doesn't prove that it's not there, right? Joe, you make a really good point in the book, and I always bring up, it's pretty good analogy. So you've got the notion of black and white, and Scott, you alluded to this notion that maybe everything isn't always black and white, and Joe used the analogy about the newspaper grayscale. So if you look at a picture in the newspaper, it looks gray from the surface because you got a bunch of different tones in it and different grays. But if you zoom in, it's actually made up of black and white dots that are different sizes that create this impression of grayness. And I think you can take that to the moral level. I think this is what Joe did in the book. You take it to the moral level, everything looks gray from the surface. But if you zoom in, you can see the black and white dots that make it up.
Well, and that's what I love about Taoism. Like, it's something that has sort of crept in on the edges of my life. Is that the Tao symbol of the yin yang.
Yeah.
Right. That the world, your experience, you are equal parts of order and chaos. And it's how you fit those two together, because like they'll always be shifting one to the other, but that point of harmony is right in between where they both meet.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where like I agree to some extent. Like the grayscale is just an interpretation of how you perceive the two meeting on the edge. That's me clapping. The two meeting on the edge, right? Because you have to see both. You can't, and that's where the word I get nervous with the word absolute, because absolute I see as you don't have the white dot on either side.
Yeah, and I mean it is difficult, and might be.
Yeah, it might be a flawed symbol in the first place.
No, it's difficult. I would say that's a challenge that we all have to face, because if you don't, if you admit, or if you say to yourself, there is no universal, there is no absolute, then what's the use of it all? Dash the cup to the ground.
See, and that's a hard line in the sand, right? Is if there isn't a universal. But I mean,
interesting metaphor, by the way.
What's that?
Hard line in the sand.
Why?
Where'd you get that one? I'm just curious.
Oh, I just made it up. It's completely unique to me. Trademark.
1 second, let me look that up. I'm gonna Google that.
So one question
No,
though,
keep
to
talking.
clarify your point, Scott, is when you say that when you think about universal, you don't see the white dot on the other side. Does that mean like the yin yang would just be one color and that's the universal? Is that what you're talking about, or because I see?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I should clarify that. So the way that I interpret the symbol, the way that I read the symbol is that the order side is white, and the black dot within it is chaos being sort of choked out or growing from within, depending on how you perceive it.
Okay.
The black side being absolute chaos, and the white dot being order. You probably know all this, but order growing from within or being choked out. So
Okay.
an absolute is. So I perceive New Orleans as absolute chaos. And
I think
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
and that's not a judgment of what it is. It's just I think that's just this city, and that's okay. At least my perception of it. So as a result,
Well, I think people share your perception.
because I think a lot of people who are here are probably very comfortable in absolute chaos. And I'm not. Like if I am by
There's that
nature,
Tuscan.
by what I do, a chaotic person, I need to be that white dot, that black dot in the white order to actually feel like I can grow. Like
Oh,
there's actual
interesting.
room to grow. Whereas if I'm the black dot in the black dot, I'm lost in an absolute, and that's where the word absolute makes me go, fuck.
Right, but also what's great about modern life is we have data, right?
Yeah.
And then we have, when we look at data, we see results either, so we see the results of certain activities. And
See, and then I think there's a very a human response to seeing statistics and saying, I am, I fall into this category. Like I naturally see like myself put into a category, and I go, get out of here. I think there's that natural human response to.
right. Like this percentage of white males 5
Yeah.
foot or taller.
Yeah.
Right, but no, I guess I'm looking at like activity or like so statistics based on consequences. So like this. So I guess I'm referring specifically to if we look at like Ireland's place, looking at abortion being having the lowest rate in Europe of abortions. Because they chose to legislate abortion out of their country. The country chose that, 8 years ago, and now we're back, and they've got it back. Anyway, but we also know that there's a pathology. Ooh, Jordan Peterson word. There's a pathology in women, a post-abortive pathology that's not healthy, and that gives them feelings of worthlessness, makes them suicidal. Lots of depression.
Yeah, I think it's 150% increase in suicide.
So,
Women who's
okay.
had an abortion.
So the suicide rate in women who've had abortion.
Alcoholism increased, depression's increased.
So that helps us in our search for, okay, what is... because I think that what is good identifies with what is true.
Yeah.
So is that good for society? Are suicidal thoughts good for society? No, let's backtrack. Where did they come from? Did they come from this? Yes, let's backtrack. Why did that happen? Oh, okay. So what can we do to prevent that or give people an alternative? Because we don't want the suicidal thoughts, we don't want the depression, we don't want the feelings of worthlessness, the guilt, the suffering. How do we backtrack from those things, find the root cause, and then eliminate that or find a positive alternative?
Yeah, so you're saying we might not know the absolute truth, but
Right. So
there are things that indicate what that is.
Right,
And
so statistical analysis actually can lead us to philosophical truth sometimes, if we analyze it properly and
That's
we're
true, I
objective.
agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at it from an individual perspective, like think of yourself as a child and being like, God, this is like, I feel like I'm just a walking, talking cliche right now, but like the child who's told, don't touch the stove because it's hot. You can see everything that you just, but I don't necessarily disagree with, because I think your opinion's valid. Obviously, that's why we're talking and why I enjoy talking to you. Is that the data, your interpretation of the data is we use it to push forward to something that is representative of an absolute universal truth for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think the intent behind that is very good and very noble. Where I, like the child in me, the 80s child, playing with G.I. Joe in me, goes like, well, shit, you can tell me that's an absolute truth, and that because of it I'll be better and I'll be happier and I won't suffer as much. But I need to suffer. Like, as the adult in me now going, I need to suffer.
Well, right. We're not, in being Catholic, we're like, yeah, suffering is where it's at. like if you're not suffering, something's wrong. Like, get out there and suffer. You got to figure this out, because if you're not suffering, like, you're wasting your time here. But right? you shouldn't be causing other people to suffer. Needlessly, that's the difference. You can accept suffering on yourself, right? Like, Jesus goes and he's like, yeah, take me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what is good and noble, right? Of course, assuming that you're not a sadomasochist. But if you're saying, oh no,
I'm definitely not.
I'm going to make you suffer with me, right? Or you're going to suffer for me, right? Well, that's enslavement, and that's actually, that's taking someone else's free will and just ripping it away from them. And so there are absolute moments in which people are doing this, right? And they are making someone a tool for their own satisfaction, convenience, or just I guess physical liberation. I don't know.
Their well-being, quality of life,
whatever the fuck that means.
Like, your point is, I see your point is valid. I don't necessarily agree with it, and I don't think I do. But it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be within it. It should be discounted or removed from the conversation. And I think that's where the article, Nellie Bowles' article, it's in response to something that you hold as, I guess, an absolute truth. If you guys are perceiving Jordan's words as having resonance, and his words deeply resonate with me, but they don't with somebody else. That's where I don't see her as necessarily wrong.
Well, one has to be wrong.
Sorry?
One has to be wrong, because
if they contradict each other.
Right, if they contradict each other, which they do.
Yeah.
Then one must be incorrect. Fundamentally.
Fundamentally, maybe, but is that?
No, there's no. It's like you can't add like.
Is it wrong?
If you add one, if you add 1 plus -1, you get 0.
Right, but her article isn't an equation, a mathematical equation. So there's room.
Right, but mathematics comes from philosophy.
But there's room for her to provide some value.
Right,
and some arguments that are valid, but then also be wrong about, or incorrect.
Well, right. If you have two people though saying, like, one saying, God exists, and another saying God does not exist. If you add those together,
those are pretty.
You don't get a solution.
It's like my son. I'm hungry. I'm not hungry. He says that all the time. Like, the instant contradiction.
Yeah.
That's a contradiction.
You just don't read. There's nothing. There's no benefit.
It cancels each other.
There's nothing there.
Right.
And nothingness is not what is.
But I'm not sure that's the case in the entire article. So I see.
No, but I'm just saying it from strictly from a philosophical and from the standpoint of dialogue, right? So if you're going to have a dialogue, there are two voices, but there is one word, right? So at the end of that dialogue, there's a correct answer to certain questions. There can be nuance, right? So there are different elements of a correct answer or a truth. There are different elements of it, but there's not multiple truths that contradict. That's impossible. I mean, it's
That's right.
a non-workable paradox.
That's right.